on the right-hand side of the slide, which was announced in March 2020. Now, that CEAP is a cornerstone of the European Green Deal and really seeks to bring the EU's commitment to introducing extended producer responsibility, or EPR, into sharp focus. The Circular Economy Action Plan outlines that considerable efforts are going to be needed, not just on the part of the producer, but also the consumer, to ensure that resources and materials retain their value beyond their first use, which is going to be absolutely key in creating viable secondary markets for them and minimizing waste generation in turn. Now, whilst the CEAP outlines that mandatory and actually existing producer responsibility regimes, such as those for waste packaging, electricals and batteries, like Valpak is concerned with, they've achieved notable progress to date all the way across the European Union. But with waste management budgets of municipalities stretched thin in the EU and individual businesses largely reluctant to take significant steps to ensure the products they place on the market are managed as sustainably as they can be once those products become waste, the EU has signalled that regulatory action is needed to ensure that all businesses move in unison and incur additional costs in unison to secure this true paradigm shift in product design and waste management. And those paradigm shifts are achieved and facilitated by the introduction of EPR, which is going to see financial mechanisms installed that are going to require products to be more durable, more repairable, more reusable, and actually more recyclable, and also requiring producers to fund the necessary costs associated with the waste management of the of the products they place on national markets across the EU. So that's a bit of a background as to EU action, and that's really providing the driving force for this. If I could have my next slide here, hopefully many of you attending today's session have seen these diagrams before. These are the the one on the left-hand side is the waste hierarchy, and kind of shows how our current societies and waste management options within them too often are associated with disposal. Going forward, it's hoped that as a result of EPR, as well as a range of other initiatives implemented by the Circular Economy Action Plan and the EU's Green Deal, that the management of multiple waste streams will be pushed up the waste hierarchy, such that the current, triangular state of affairs is turned into a pentagon and actually then flipped on its head quite literally to achieve that diagram on the right-hand side, the sort of reformed waste hierarchy, if you will. But next slide, please. Turning to the UK state of affairs, or at least England's state of affairs, the announcement of the government's desire to extensively interlace principles of EPR within England's resources and waste sector in the hope of putting the UK on pace to being net zero by 2050 and limiting all avoidable waste by 2050 came in the Resources and Waste Strategy, which was published in late 2018. Now, extended producer responsibility is a critical element of this strategy. And as mentioned, the central ambition of EPR is to make producers bear the financial responsibility for the net costs associated with the waste management of the items they place on the market, a concept or a principle known as full net cost recovery. Now, full net cost recovery is going to involve moving a fair degree of costs currently borne by local authorities to producers of products, and actually that's going to result in some fairly substantial producer responsibility cost increases for certain businesses. For example, in the case of packaging waste management, the introduction of EPR, to the packaging waste management is going to see some businesses' producer responsibility costs rise by 10 to 30 times, which is probably a key reason why some of you on the call today and some of the businesses you represent are already engaging in the topic of extended producer responsibility of packaging waste before it even hits the statute books. If we're to believe the same or similar action in terms of financial cost transference is going to occur in the furniture sector, then I am encouraged by the I'm encouraged in hearing that so many of you have decided to jump on today's webinar with us. But EPR isn't simply focused on the end-of-life cost transference. The EU estimates that 80% of a product's environmental impact is determined during the design phase. And as a result, EPR is also going to entail the implementation of other mechanisms, such as eco-modulation. And that's a financial mechanism where producers are incentivized to use more recyclable and recycled materials, and actually making the prices they pay for placing items on the market reflect the environmental costs that those items incur all the way across their lifetime, not just in when they become waste, but also in the design and production process. Now, there are also a range of other core principles of extended producer responsibility mentioned within the resource and waste strategy, such as the others listed in bullet points on this slide. For example, all EPR regimes implemented in England will feature standards for product durability and repairability, clear responsibilities for key stakeholders, and a commitment to introducing these new producer responsibility regimes in a pervasive manner across the nation, so that the rollout of new waste management provisions and operations isn't just limited to areas where it is financially beneficial to do so, for example, in dense cities. If we can have our next slide, please. There's a little bit more information on this slide, largely the same, but the text has changed. Now, there were a number of different waste streams the government is committed to investigating the introduction of principles of EPR to. The Resource and Waste Strategy announced that the government was first going to focus on updating producer responsibility rules currently in place for waste packaging, electricals, batteries, and end-of-life vehicles, ELVs, I should say, before turning to considering introducing similar rules for 5 additional waste streams that were seen as really key to alter in England's fight against considerable waste being generated. Unfortunately, bulky household waste is actually one of these 5 other key streams that EPR may be introduced for. Now, at the time in late 2018, the government said industry will be consulted on the introduction of EPR rules to these additional waste streams by 2025, with 2 consultations to be expedited and held by 2022. Now, a fair bit of time has passed since the Resources and Waste Strategy was originally published, and as such, in the Waste Management Plan for England that was actually published earlier this year, we now know that those 2 expedited consultations will be for EPR for textiles and fishing gear. So unfortunately, we're going to have to wait a little bit longer yet for bulky waste EPR proposals and a producer responsibility regime for bulky household waste, at least on a mandatory basis. But we, as a result of all of this information within the Resource and Waste Strategy, as well as other documents such as the Waste Management Plan for England, we have a pretty good idea as to what proposals for bulky household waste EPR might contain. And that's because there's lots of actions and lots of measures within the Environment Bill, which is the piece of legislation that provides government the powers to introduce extended producer responsibility, that are mentioned. For example, eco-design standards, recycling targets, and improved consumer information provision are some examples. That bill still isn't in law yet. It is still being discussed by, I believe, the House of Lords at this stage, but provides us with a really good idea as to what we can expect for bulky household waste EPR going forward. If we can have my next slide, please. I wanted to consider what the consultation on bulky household waste EPR might include, and I've considered a few things here based on looking at current requirements within producer responsibility regimes in the UK, as well as what EPR proposals we believe are going to come out of consultations for packaging, as well as waste electricals extended producer responsibility that we're expecting across the remainder of this year going into early 2022. So if we first look at the top right of this this massive Venn diagram that I've put together, Full net cost obligations are going to be a central component of EPR. We're pretty certain on that at this point in time. We don't actually have a great idea as to what the full net cost recovery obligation, what cost increases businesses within the furniture sector may expect as a result of this. However, actually, this webinar is quite timely because Oakes Hollins did some really useful research for Valpak recently on the impact of full net cost recovery for mattresses on producers. Now, this report is due to be published soon, so I won't give everything away because I'm trying to incentivize businesses and individuals to go and read the report. But it did find that the full net cost of managing waste mattresses in 2017 was around £64 million, or about £8.84 per unit. And Oakes Hollins actually found that an EPR scheme without household collections being included within that, funded by producers, of course, would require producers to pay around £6 for each unit they place on the market towards the establishment of an EPR regime for waste mattresses. And then if household collections would be to be included within that full net cost recovery obligation on mattress producers, then the amounts they would need to pay per unit placing on the market would be about £15 per unit. So there are some significant cost increases there, but ultimately those are projections, very early stage projections, simply to get the conversation around, at least in this case, mattress EPR talked about. In terms of other areas mentioned around this large diagram that I've got, minimum standards, producer funded but centrally delivered consumer communications are expected at this point in time. Certainly consumer communications is mentioned within packaging EPR proposal at this stage, and detailed reporting in respect of what products go onto the market and where, how much and what waste arises from local authorities is also going to be required to be reported under this new system. Those are things that we can expect to be included within the EPR consultation for bulky household waste. And then the remainder of the points around this diagram are ones that I've thrown up here to be considered. They aren't certainties. However, if we're to look at current producer responsibility regimes, they are core parts of it. So, for example, take back is something that is installed within the Waste Electricals Producer Responsibility Scheme, so under the distributor take back scheme. And looking at furniture retailers at the moment, many high street retailers offer to dispose of furniture for one-off fees on a like-for-like basis. The ones I saw certainly were a cost of around £50 for consumers. Under Waste Electricals Producer Responsibility, that's actually an obligation on retailers. Might we see that for the furniture sector going forward? Contributions towards litter fly tip costs are also something mentioned, certainly within the packaging EPR proposals at this stage, to the tune of £200 million being expected to be funded by obligated businesses under that system. Might we see a similar contribution needed to be made by producers of furniture under these EPR proposals? Electronic passports, something that is going to be an increasingly commonplace aspect within producer responsibility regimes going forward. Certainly, I'm aware that the European Union proposes for electronic product passports for batteries over the coming years, where consumers will be able to access information on recycled contents, critical materials used within those batteries. Again, might we expect those for furniture? More than just fire safety labelling may also need to be required on furniture. For example, will producers of furniture be required to include details on how a user can contact a reuse organisation to ensure that when they've ended their use of furniture, but it can be reused, how best can we ensure that these products go back into the reuse stream to enhance their circularity and ensure that they are not disposed of, be it in a sustainable or unsustainable manner? So we have lots of different elements of EPR, a variety of carrot and stick approaches here that are going to come under this umbrella term that is extended producer responsibility. But there are a number of questions that reforms and the consultation on bulky household waste EPR will need to address going forwards. I've listed a few of those down, so I'm just going to read some of those off. Will EPR be purely an exercise of waste management cost transference, or are full net cost obligations going to be on a single party in a similar manner to what we've seen with packaging EPR, where most of the costs are going to be placed on brand owners? And similarly, what types of producers are we looking at placing obligations on? I raise this question because the British Furniture Confederation estimates that in late 2019, 82% of companies in the furniture and bed manufacturing sector had a turnover of less than £1 million. So should there even be a exemption for small businesses from new financial obligations that would be placed on them under extended producer responsibility? Next, what reforms or do reforms need to be stream specific? Of course, there's domestic furniture, there is contract furniture, such as that in public and communal places, and then office furniture as well. Are there going to be specific measures for different streams of furniture? And then what range of materials are we looking at challenging? Is it just going to be foams, springs, and wood within furniture? And where will furniture textiles sit? Sorry. Will any of those textiles fall under textiles EPR that's going to be implemented too in the coming years? And so ultimately, all of these questions and all of these proposals are still to come to the fore. After all, bulky household waste EPR occupies only a few lines within a few critical documents. So at this point in time, it is we are speculating what could be included within this consultation in a few years' time. But ultimately, the question is, can consumer and producer attitudes to second-hand items be overcome to enhance the circularity of the furniture sector? I can have my next slide, please. As mentioned, we are due to get a consultation on bulky household waste EPR, and that's actually a really crucial point in time in the early policy formulation process, because it enables interested stakeholders to have their voice heard by government and actually potentially guide some of the proposals being devised by DEFRA. Now, if we're looking at the experience of the packaging EPR reforms that were held across the early portion of 2021, it appears that the government will be guided by industry views on certain elements. For example, in my experience of the packaging EPR consultation, many corners of industry weren't happy with the proposals for transferring cost of waste management of business waste to producers away from the waste producing business, to the extent that we may actually see government go with a completely new approach than the three that came up in the EPR consultation. So if government are to be guided by the thoughts of industry in respect of bulky household waste EPR, then really my call to action for those of you on the call today will be to ensure that your voice is heard. Don't just rely on your trade association to respond on your behalf to the bulky household waste EPR consultation. Respond directly, and that will be especially key if government is to be guided by this, but it is to look at the weight of industry opinion behind this. So it might be worth you responding to the questions individually as a business. And actually, in terms of responding, DEFRA's portal, at least the online portal that consultation submissions can be submitted through, called Citizen Space, it actually allows you, or did allow you, in respect to the packaging EPR consultation, to respond to as many or as few of the questions that government tabled as you like. So if you don't have the expertise or don't feel like you have the expertise such that you can answer every single question that comes out of this bulky household waste EPR consultation, you are at liberty to respond to only a few that really concern you. So hopefully that will encourage those of you on the call today and your businesses to respond to those questions within the consultation that truly affect you and truly impact you looking at it. I can have my next slide, please. This is just my last slide, and it's a shameless plug for some Valpak services. So being first and foremost a packaging compliance scheme, Valpak are going to a great extent to attempt to quantify the potential financial impacts of packaging extended producer responsibility on our members. And we're actually extending the offering of EPR clinics, one-to-one clinics, to any business who is affected by the reforms. If you're a Valpak member, we'll actually take the data you provide to us in respect to the packaging you place on the market and uncover your potential financial exposure to packaging EPR and understand what information you need to gather in order to ensure that when packaging EPR comes around across 2023 and 24, you are in a place to not only meet the administrative burdens placed on you by packaging EPR, but also mitigate the scale of the cost increases that you might expect to see. So for Valpak members, please do get in touch with your Valpak account manager or contact the email address at the bottom of this slide. And any businesses that are interested in this service, please do as well contact that email address. We're keen to hear back from you. And I believe, we can click onto my next slide, that is everything that I have to present on today. So thank you very much for persevering with me. As I said, questions will be at the end of the session. So if you do have any, please do pop them in the Q&A. And apart from that, thank you. Back to you, Charlie.
Thank you, George. Thank you for Valpak for presenting. I really liked your presentation, especially on the impetus of EPR and the full net cost recovery on producers, which is extremely relevant, especially in the furniture industry. So thank you for that. Also found the bulky household waste EPR diagram quite insightful. So thank you. And any questions I'll pass on to you at the end of the presentation today. Thank you, George. Next up, we have one of our co-hosts, which is Eurofins BLC, and we have Peter Hughes, who is the head of Sustainability Business Development. And today is going to talk about the traceability of material supply chains and their waste streams. Peter has been working on improving traceability with his clients and manage environmental and social challenges through effective due diligence programs. So it's going to be a great presentation. I'm quite looking forward to it. So over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks for teeing me up. Today I'm going to be talking about understanding the end of life of your materials and looking particularly at traceability and end of life testing and verification. As you can hear from George's presentation just now, legislation is on the way in this space, but some organisations are already starting to look at end of life quite seriously. And today's presentation, we're going to look at how Eurofins BLC as a business is supporting these organisations to deliver in this area. So next slide, please. As an introduction to Eurofins BLC, for those of you who don't know us, we are a boutique technology support centre. We have a developed testing and consultancy business. We work predominantly with footwear, furniture, and sectors traditionally in the leather sector, although we now look at all materials. We are material specialists. And our work provides risk management solutions to those organisations who work with us, and we provide effective due diligence to some of the new sustainability challenges that organisations are facing. Next slide, please. We have a range of support on offer. As I say, we have our testing facilities on site, and we're going to be talking about some of our testing capability later on. We also have our consulting function. We work with organisations to understand traceability of their materials, how to better manage their chemistry. We look at environmental stewardship through industry programs, social compliance through site audits, certifications against industry programs such as ZDHC within our ChemMap program for chemical compliance. We look at the development of new materials, and finally, end of life through biodegradability testing and circular economy. We like to work in a collaborative way. We believe that our position in the industry allows us to support clients to develop areas around sustainability, and as I say, we are a collaborative organisation. Next slide, please. I think it's useful to start a presentation of this type just referring to what sustainable might mean for you as an organisation. We hear the word sustainable all the time, and sustainable is very often associated with the end-of-life considerations. However, if you drill down to what people mean by sustainability, there'll often be multiple different definitions. In fact, if you sit around a room and ask people what it means to them, you'll find a different definition by almost every single person in the room. Examples on the screen here, for example, able to be maintained at a certain rate or level. This is a perfectly reasonable definition of sustainable. It doesn't have any ethical associations with it, but it is a reasonable definition. A lot of people regard sustainable as something to do with environmental, ensuring environmental balance is achieved. But that doesn't really encompass social compliance considerations. You'll hear sustainability being used to defend good practice. I think the best definition of sustainable really looks at the three capitals model, looking at how we enhance social capital through the balanced use of economic capital without depleting environmental capital. And that's really the most comprehensive definition of sustainable. But I would encourage you as an organization to define what it means within your own organization, as it's important as you go along your journey, particularly looking at end of life, to understand what sustainable means for you. Next slide, please. I think it's also fair to say, and I think the people joining this call would agree, that sustainable thinking is just good business now. It's no longer a fringe activity or idea. It's part of how organizations work effectively. And by integrating sustainability effectively, you can add commercial value, you can differentiate your brand, you can add value through efficiency. There are multiple different benefits. But one important catch when talking about sustainability in a wider business context, it's very important to be authentic as to what you're saying. There are plenty of examples of organizations who've been caught out through greenwashing or making claims that are not backed up by evidence. So we would always encourage you, if you are going to publicly talk in this space, to ensure that you have an authentic message and you can back up your claims. It's also true that the majority of impact of an organization isn't really within the organization's direct control, but rather within the material supply of their products up their supply chain and with the end of life of their products. So what happens to their products after the end of its usable life? And that's the downstream piece, which more of this today's presentation is focusing on. And how a brand or organization tackles these issues outside of their direct control, but within their influence, really differentiates what a truly sustainable organization is. Next slide, please. So as we've heard from George just now, the scope of producer responsibility is increasing. Our industry has often and generally focused a lot on upstream environmental and social impacts. So looking at what your upstream manufacturers and suppliers are doing in this space. However, responsible organizations are starting to consider both upstream material impacts and the downstream end-of-life routes of their products. And as I've said, a comprehensive sustainability strategy considers both the upstream and downstream management of their products. And what we would say is that visibility of these impacts is a crucial part of effective management, visibility both upstream and downstream. And I think, we are seeing increasing global pressure in this downstream consideration and the end-of-life credentials of a product. There's growing concern for the issues of landfill and linear end-of-life solutions. So circular economy is really the direction of travel that is where we're heading. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, looking at traceability, we are seeing increasing drivers towards traceability within organizations, predominantly from environmental and social challenges, but also increasingly from investors. So investors are asking where your products are coming from and what is happening to your products at the end of their life. We've just heard from George about new legislation that is being driven at the end of life space, and that is going to continue to drive a need for traceability of your products. To a certain extent, customer and consumer demands and awareness are also driving this, and also industry programs as well. Industry and certification programs are increasingly asking for traceability for downstream of the products. And what we would say is that effective traceability can form the basis of a strategic response to managing risk within your supply chain and within the downstream end of life of your products. Next slide, please. So we're at Eurofins BLC. We have an established traceability program upstream looking at supply chains. We've been working in this space for several years now, and we have an effective system now for identifying and presenting the supply chain of your products. This example here is showing a leather supply chain. I mean, leather is our brand, and we've done a lot of work in this space. And you can see here how a brand might be sourcing from Europe and Asia, but actually the raw materials of their products are coming from as far afield as Australia, South America, and North America. And as I say, this is an established system that we have in place for looking at upstream supply chains. Next slide, please. And so next, if we can just click on one click. What we would say here is traceability, looking at your organization and looking at where your raw material extraction is coming from, is looking at upstream your supply chain. Where is your product being produced and raw material being sourced from? Well, we are now starting to consider traceability and mapping using the same type of technology to look at downstream and waste and end of life. And the objective is to try and determine, using traceability techniques, so mapping techniques, what your waste stream looks like. So mapping your waste stream. Instead of looking at mapping your supply chain, we're looking at mapping your waste stream. One more click, please. And as part of this, is to identify what opportunities there are at the waste and end of life of your products for creating a circular economy piece, so that that waste and end of life can then become raw material for a new product, and essentially close that loop and create a circular economy. Next slide, please. So this is an example manufacturer waste stream, and I'm just going to talk you through how we would go approach mapping a process such as this. So we can click on, please. So each manufacturer has a range of waste streams. We've just put some examples up there. For example, packaging, hard lines, soft lines, effluent. These are different waste streams that at the manufacturing stage are being produced. Click on, please. That manufacturer will be working with a waste contractor, and that waste contractor will be managing those different waste streams. There could be different waste contractors for different waste streams. There could be one waste contractor managing multiple waste streams, depending on the manufacturer and the product being made. Next slide, please. That waste contractor will then be transporting that waste to a waste processor. They could be the same organization, they might be different organizations. And those waste processors will be managing and processing that waste produced by the manufacturer. Next slide, please. That waste processor will then be looking for a waste disposal outcome for that material. And we've got a range here. If you can just click on next, please. What we are saying, therefore, is using the principles of traceability within the waste mapping. The manufacturer is your tier one. That's the same as if you're looking at your supply chain. But the waste contractors that manufacturer is using would be your tier +1. So this is +1 because it's downstream as opposed to upstream of your supply chain. So those contractors would be a tier +1 to you. And then the processors taking that waste would be tier +3 to you. So these are, again, these are tiers of activity removed from you, but downstream of your product rather than upstream of your product. If you can click on, please. Some of those tier 3s will be producing, will be managing waste and sending to landfill and incineration, it's likely. That would be considered a linear economy route. And obviously, according to, as we've just seen from George, we want to move away from that space. Click on, please. And other processes will be looking at recycling and treatment and other circular economy routes to disposal. And what we'd be looking to do through this process would be to identify what organizations are doing and how much of your waste is ending up in a circular economy space and how much is like moving into a linear economy space. Next slide, please. So the way the process works is similar to how our traceability process works. So it's a very collaborative process. We would work with you as an organization to determine the type of suppliers you are working with. We then launch the project. We create a waste contractor questionnaire, which is an online questionnaire to be delivered to the waste contractors within your tier 1 suppliers. Your tier 1 suppliers would complete the questionnaire and would circulate with their waste contractors. We would manage the responses in real time to ensure information was being delivered to us. And then we would review the data, plot that data into our mapping resource that we use currently for upstream material supply chains, do a regional cluster analysis and prepare a report. And finally, we would present that report back to you through an interactive presentation with the objective to support you as an organization to understand your current waste stream process and really see where your waste is going. Next slide, please. What we're saying is if you map your waste streams, you can know it, understand it, and respond to it effectively, and have a better risk management process. Next slide, please. What we expect you to be able to achieve through this kind of process is identify challenges and potentially any gaps in knowledge that you may or may not know of. Really shine a light on how the process works for you. It's often an area that you as an organisation may not know in any great detail. By undertaking this kind of activity, it indicates a responsible engagement with the challenges of waste, and again will be something that you will be able to report on at your end of year report. Potentially it might identify new waste solutions for you, but certainly opens a line of inquiry that definitely needs to be addressed, which is getting a better handle on where your waste is going from your supply chain to its end of life. Okay, so today's presentation, we're really launching this product today. So we've been in the process of developing this waste mapping product, and I'd be happy to discuss it in more detail if anybody is interested in this space. Next slide, please. There are other important considerations for end-of-life materials, and as material experts, we are working in this area as well. And I thought it'd be useful just to touch on a few of the important areas that we've learned and we understand in this space. And I'd just like to go through these just now. So we're going to look briefly at sustainable chemistry, potentially briefly at leather waste, disintegration and biodegradability, and finally close on plastics and microplastics. Okay, next slide, please. So sustainable chemistry, our lab on site has developed a chemical analysis lab, and sustainable chemistry, which is ensuring that cleaner chemistry in your material supply chain is free of hazardous and restricted. A very key part of the activity that we do at Eurofins PLC. And what we say is by delivering a cleaner chemical input, this can encourage opportunities for greater circular economy. If material has hazardous chemistry in it, it can be very challenging for that material to be recycled at the end of life and still be chemically compliant in the new product. So what we are saying is it's important to ensure that you don't have hazardous chemistry upstream in your supply chain to ensure that your product has the potential to be recycled or used in the circular economy space downstream. So this clean chemistry is really important at the very outset of manufacture. And we would say that that's a very crucial part of effective recycling. And the way that we can support you in this space is through chemical testing, as I've mentioned. Our consulting department and consulting team are working closely in this space. We offer training. And you may have come across our ChemMap program, which looks to analyze the chemical compliance of your manufacturers within your supply chain and give you that confidence that the type of chemistry that is being used in your products is not hazardous and is ensured as sustainable. So sustainable chemistry, I think it's important we highlight this. If you're thinking about recycling your material, recycling your products, you need to be thinking about chemistry as well. You need to be thinking, is the chemistry we're using going to allow our products to be recycled at the end of life? Or is if the product we're looking to recycle is going to have a mix of recycler in it, does that recycler mix, is it ensuring that that recycler mix is adhering to chemical compliance? Okay, next slide, please. As I mentioned, leather is a sort of key material that Eurofins PLC has focused on for many years. Leather is an unusual material, and we expect that many of people on this call today will use leather in their product in some format. Leather is unusual in the sense that it's challenging to recycle, particularly finished leather. In fact, the process of turning rawhide and skin into leather actively stops the process of that material naturally breaking down. And so finding a way of finding a sustainable end of life for that material is an important challenge, and one that there isn't a clear answer for yet. We are in the process of establishing a leather waste spotlight project with the objective to identify practical solutions for leather waste in the industry. And what we're looking to do is get engaged groups or brands or organizations into the same space who are looking for solutions in this area to work in a collaborative way. We're going to identify the types of leather waste in the supply chain and at end of life, look at existing and upcoming relevant regulation specifically for leather waste, We're going to look at current options for disposing waste and identify potentially new technologies. And we are going to propose the opportunity to run some innovation trials to identify potential solutions to leather waste. So again, if this is something you might be interested in, please do feel free to contact me at the end of this session. Next slide, please. We also are working quite significantly at the moment in disintegration and biodegradability testing. And this is something that you might be interested in for a range of materials to understand, does your material disintegrate or biodegrade at the end of its life? Because this could form a closed loop process or a circular economy process for your materials. I'm not going to dwell on this slide for too long in the interest of time, but essentially we offer disintegration testing using the ISO 20200 modified method, which looks at whether material will disintegrate in a substrate. We look at biodegradability testing using the ISO 20136 method, which looks at aerobic biodegradation and measures the amount of CO2 production over a period of time to determine whether a material is biodegrading. We offer ecotox and plant response testing to ensure that the substrate that your material is disintegrating or biodegrading into isn't being found with hazardous chemistry in there or any other controlled substances. But also there is the potential that the material could actually enrich the substrate that it's disintegrating into, and that's how the plant response test is used. Essentially, these suite of tests can determine whether your product or material that you're testing could be determined as being compostable. And what we would recommend is that you undertake tests such as these on your material to be able to make compostable claims. And making a compostable claim is obviously one route that you can look at to ensuring end-of-life circular economy considerations from a sustainable perspective for your materials. Okay, next slide, please. The last topic we're going to touch on here is plastics. I don't think you can ever talk about waste and end of life without considering plastic. Plastic is such a ubiquitous material that we use across all industries. This data is from Our World in Data. It's a little bit out of date in the sense that it's from 2015. But what this shows is the amount of plastic being produced in that year and where of that plastic is going. As you can see, 150 million tons of plastic was produced in just packaging alone. And I'm sure that every single organization on this call is using plastic somewhere in their packaging, or if they're not, fantastic, good job. But the fact is packaging and plastic go hand in hand across most industries. It's not actually the creation of plastic that's the problem, but it's actually what to do with that plastic at the end of its use. So if you can click onto the next slide. If you look at what has happened to global plastic production and its fate over the past 60 years or so, this graph here shows the amount of plastic that has been produced across that period. And as you can see, 8.3 billion tons of plastic has been produced in the past 60 years. And the majority of that material is still in existence. In fact, roughly 2.5 billion tons of it is still in its primary use. So these would be plastics, for example, in things like light fittings and things like that in buildings that remain in constant use. And to a certain extent, furniture could potentially be part of that space as well. Some of it has been recycled, a very small amount of it. A small amount of it has been incinerated, but the majority of it, 4.6 billion tons of plastic, has been discarded and placed into landfill. Most plastic that has been produced is still in existence in some form. Plastic was only really started getting produced at any kind of scale in the late 1950s, and almost all of that plastic currently still exists. And what we're interested in is in the uncontrolled release of that type of plastic. So not the sort of plastic that's still in primary use or the stuff that's being recycled or incinerated, but what about that large chunk, the plastic that is still in existence that has some level of uncontrolled release? And the majority of that plastic is going into landfill. Next slide, please. How we're looking at this is the extraction and release of microplastics. So what we know is plastic does break down, and that can then form into microplastics, which can then be released into the environment. And you've probably heard from various different news sources that we're starting to identify microplastics in many, many different places. They've been found in the oceans, in rivers. They've even been found on the top of mountains. So microplastics are becoming a real ecological challenge. We don't yet know the scale of the ecological challenge, but it's important that organisations do start to understand whether the materials they are producing microplastics. And we have a suite of microplastic testing available to determine the scale that products might shed microplastics under certain conditions. We've got some images here from our electron microscope which show you what the actual microplastics start to look like. And these are on filters to determine where the microplastics are, where we're capturing them. But the reason we wanted to touch on this is it's important to consider plastic within your supply chain, when and where you use it, and the potential uncontrolled release of plastic into the environment. Okay, next slide, please. So to conclude the presentation, when looking at materials within the context of end of life, we would always encourage you as an organisation to understand your product through testing. You'll be able to communicate authentically in any kind of sustainability space if you have testing to back up your claims. Determine how you might respond to regulations. So it's great to see you on the call today because of the type of discussion that we're having, particularly, for example, from George's presentation earlier on. Recognise where you sit relative to your competitors in your understanding of the issue and how much you as an organisation feel you need to contribute and engage in this space, and where you want to sit on a sort of leader to follow a scale of sustainability within the end of life materials question. Communicate and work with your key material suppliers and your key waste contractors. Having good engagement with these organisations is crucial to good waste management. And finally, make informed material selection wherever possible. So if you are using a material in your supply chain, if you're using it in your product or your packaging, what happens to that material at the end of its life? Make considered material choices where possible. Okay, we can move to the next slide. That concludes my presentation. So if you've got any questions, very happy to discuss these in the panel discussion at the end, and feel free to use the Q&A function.
Thank you, Peter. That was a very comprehensive presentation. I actually really enjoyed the supply chain diagram. It was mad to think that part of that supply chain was Australia, South America. It was mind-boggling to see how big and that can grow. But no, thank you very much for that. That was great. Thank you. Right, next up is the home team, which I'm excited to introduce. We've got the wonderful Olivia Judge, is our technical consultant. She'll be talking about circularity as a path towards greater sustainability. We also got David Parker, who's our senior technical consultant, who'll be joining at the end for the panel discussions. If you've got any intense questions for him, that would be great. But Olivia worked very closely with the EPR for bulky waste within DEFRA and has a lot of experience in this. So I'm excited for this presentation. So make Hope Dean proud. Thank you, Olivia.
Thank you, Charlie. That's probably the nicest introduction I've ever had in my life. It's really nice to see so many people on the call today, and as well some familiar names too. So I'll be presenting on behalf of Oak Dean Hollins today, and the presentation is called Circularity as a Path Towards Greater Sustainability. I won't be touching too much on the EPR side of things because George did a great job of that previously. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with who we are, Oak Dean Hollins, we are a research and management consultancy, and we specialise in circular economy. So we started off years ago with quite a big focus on waste management and recycling. And over the years, we've really expanded our services and expertise to broad aspects of sustainability and the circular economy. So specific areas that we look in are value retention, policy support, carbon footprinting, and value stream mapping. So as you can imagine, we work across many different sectors, but we have a lot of experience working in the furniture and mattress industries. Some examples of our work include building the initial evidence base for DEFRA for the bulky waste EPR, and we have also supported UK and EU trade associations towards developing their evidence bases and developing their collective positioning on EPR, such as the National Bed Federation and Carpet Recycling UK. Next slide, please. So just a brief introduction and overview of what I'll be looking at today. Firstly, I will give you an introduction of what the size of the problem is in relation to furniture and the end-of-life arisings. We will then explore what the remaining environmental impacts are in relation to furniture from the design stage all the way through to their end of life. Thirdly, we will introduce the circular economy and what its relevance is to the UK furniture industry. I will then look at the value retention framework, which my colleagues have been working in extensively and have developed a really useful framework in. And finally, I will sum up and say how the circular economy and value retention processes can achieve wider sustainability ambitions. Next slide, please. So furniture and mattresses are a really significant proportion of bulky municipal waste. This pie chart was based on a 2012 research project carried out by WRAP, and it looked at the total bulky waste arisings across curbside and HWRC drop-off. And as you can see, of the total bulky waste in the UK, around 42% consist of furniture and about 10% were mattresses. So as a result, bulky waste and furniture and mattresses, of course, have been named a problematic waste stream as they incur a net cost to local authorities. They have many different challenges attached to them, which I'll go into later, but overall they have quite poor end markets for the recoverable materials and also have high transportation and storage costs due to their relative size and bulkiness. Next slide, please. So why are furniture products being considered by the UK government as a priority? So they represent quite a high volume, low waste value stream, low value waste stream, and they have environmental hotspots located across their entire value chain. So the infographic here on the slide represents upholstered furniture, and it shows the environmental hotspots located across the value chain and categorizes them via high, medium, and low priority. Now, due to time restrictions today, I will only focus on the high priority hotspots. So firstly, many of the materials involved in upholstered furniture have quite a high carbon footprint. So this includes textiles, foams, and the polyester fillings. And significant reductions can be made in relation to reducing the carbon footprint of the products by minimizing the amount of fillings used or by switching to fillings which have a lower carbon impact. The second hotspot is focusing on the production and manufacture of textiles. I think we're probably all aware that it's a very highly energy intensive process and it emits quite a vast amount of greenhouse gas emissions. So that's certainly something to consider as well. The next hotspot is fly tipping, and upholstered furniture and furniture in general has a high level of fly tipping and is commonly cited in fly tipping incidences. So improving the convenience and the ease of furniture collection is really essential to counteract this negative behaviour. Upholstered furniture in particular also thought to have one of the shortest average first lifetimes of all furniture products. And this is most probably to do with the fact they're quite susceptible to changing fashions as they're located inside the household. Next we have, and finally, that upholstered furniture has quite limited reuse and recycling opportunities. So about 80% of upholstered furniture is currently being sent to landfill or incineration. Reuse is rather limited because consumers aren't particularly demanding reused products, and recycling is quite limited because, as you can imagine, there's a vast array of materials being used in one product and they have quite a low value of the recoverable materials after recycling, and they also are quite difficult to deconstruct during the recycling process. Also, many of the fillings and the fabrics that are recovered are unsuitable for anything other than energy recovery. This is because they may be stained, contaminated, or contain unknown flame retardants. So although I focused only on upholstered furniture for this slide, I think it's really important for me to mention that this infographic would look significantly different for any other furniture product, such as metal furniture or mattresses. So, for example, metal furniture has the highest upstream impact of any other material choice, but its end-of-life disposal is quite a lot less problematic than upholstered furniture, for instance, as it has a large established market for scrap metal, which is already recovering the majority of it. Next slide, please. So onto the circular economy. The circular economy, it adopts practices which allows businesses to grow without increasing their overall impact. This diagram I've included, I think, is a really simple way of visualizing what I mean by it. And really, at the moment, we're in the linear economy, which is the current take, make, and waste model. And we are looking to go beyond that and aiming to adopt practices which decouple economic activity from the consumption of raw materials. Now, circular economy has three key principles. Firstly is to design out waste and pollution. Secondly is to keep materials and products in use for the longest period of time. And thirdly is to regenerate natural systems. Now, today's presentation and webinar is actually majority focused on the first two principles. So a circular economy has many, many benefits, as you can imagine, including waste reduction, having greater resource productivity, and also creating a more competitive market. But in relation to the furniture sector specifically, there is a huge potential for implementing circular economy across your products. This may include increasing the recycled content in your products, or increasing the value retention opportunities and durability. Also, companies may start to and are starting to look at alternative models such as leasing or take-back services. So my next slide will focus on value retention specifically. However, if you are interested in any of the remaining principles, then we really encourage you to get in touch. Next slide, please. So value retention, then, it's all about keeping products in use for the most valuable amount of time possible. We have vast amounts of experience applying this framework to businesses and sectors, and Oaken Hollins has acknowledged that it can be applied at both a product and material level. So product value retention processes include remanufacture, refurbishment, reuse, and repair. And these processes really should be adopted when a product reaches its end of use phase. And this is when the product still functions or has the potential to function, but the current owner no longer has a need or requirement for it. So I'm quickly going to introduce each of these product level processes, although I'm aware some are more self-explanatory than others. So remanufacturing is often poorly understood, and as a result can maybe receive quite negative perceptions of the products. But remanufactured products, in fact, are returned to the same as new or better condition, and they have a guarantee attached to them. In terms of product life extension, for example, remanufacturing is the most effective process here, and it also has the ability to be implemented multiple times across the product's lifespan. Although rather small, the furniture industry does have an existing market for remanufacturing, and this is primarily in the office furniture space, as business might be replacing whole suites of furniture for aesthetic or corporate branding reasons. On to refurbishment. Now, this involves improving a product's condition, which may be through replacing its upholstery or reapplying the paint on the exterior of the product. Refurbishment can be supported by businesses if you make sustainable design improvements, such as designing products for assembly and creating more standardized models. Also, businesses may decide to carry out capacity building across their staff in order to offer a refurbishment service. Reuse of furniture will happen when a customer no longer has a need for it, but it hasn't yet stopped providing its original function. So its ownership is transferred to a new user. Manufacturers can encourage reuse by increasing the durability of their products, but also by sourcing materials that are suitable for multiple uses. Now, last but not least, repair is when a product may reach its end of use, but its expected end of life, but not its expected end of life because of a fault, but it can obviously be repaired. So the key to encouraging repair is to collaborate across the value stream and with your suppliers, your partners, and your consumers, and to make your information more readily available in relation to spare parts and repair services. Another option may be to incorporate modularity into your products and to ensure that single parts are more easily removed. So they are the product level processes, and I will quickly breeze over the material level processes. And these include recycling, refining, and compounding. So when a product reaches its end of life, this is when it can't fulfill its technical function anymore, and therefore a process should be adopted, which is the most effective strategy for attaining the highest value from the available recoverable materials. So this value retention thinking, we really feel enables stakeholders to really better understand what they can do to maintain the value of their products. Too commonly, we find that products skip past their end of use stage and are kind of deemed of no value to businesses or consumers and are therefore at their end of life. But value retention really needs to be better understood and really offers an opportunity for the furniture sector to increase their relative sustainability. For instance, businesses may decide to offer remanufactured or refurbished products, and this will really help to improve their environmental credentials, but also help to prepare themselves for any top-down policy intervention, such as EPR that George mentioned, where they could be maybe negatively penalised. Next slide, please. So what is the relevance of all this information into the bigger picture? Well, circular economy principles can support businesses and policymakers in achieving their wider sustainability ambitions. So today I've focused on net zero, supply chain collaboration, and wider societal benefits. I'm sure you're aware that net zero is a really important and highly topical narrative at the moment for businesses and policymakers. And circular economy thinking and value retention processes can really help to reduce emissions by diverting materials from becoming a waste, that being from diverting them from landfill or recycling applications, but also through encouraging product life extension. Value retention processes also help to reduce the need for raw material extraction, as well as the manufacturing or recycling of new parts. So all of the above have quite obvious carbon saving potential. As for supply chain collaboration, the circular economy offers an opportunity to connect one's waste to another's resource. And this can be done through utilising existing or new relationships in order to cycle those materials indefinitely through the system. And in order to make quite significant environmental impacts to products, but also to avoid any unintended consequences, you really need to be carrying out cross-value chain engagement. And this in turn will really facilitate knowledge share and innovation opportunities, as well as alternative product designs, such as maybe making your product more easy to disassemble or repair. And the final link to circular economy I'll touch on today is its contribution to wider societal benefits. So Green Alliance recently released research which estimated expanding the circular economy can create 205,000 new jobs in the UK alone. Consumers are clearly becoming a lot more mindful of the products they buy, and therefore implementing value retention across your product offerings will really satisfy this consumer demand for better, longer lasting products. And finally, in particular, through encouraging reuse, the circular economy supports the third sector, as the majority of furniture is reused. Furniture reuse is carried out via social enterprises and charities. Next slide, please. So just a few final thoughts and conclusions from me before I wind down. So I think it's clear that the furniture sector is a really complex area to be in. So a one-size-fits-all approach to the furniture industry is definitely not suitable. This is in relation to implementing circular economy strategies, or, for instance, when consulting on policy measures such as extended producer responsibility. There's such a vast array of products on the market, and as I've shown, each have very different environmental hotspots attached to them. My second point is that I think there's a huge benefit of industries, but also businesses taking a proactive stance on environmental topics, as well as policy interventions such as EPR. Businesses should really start to engage with policymakers to better prepare themselves for any future changes. Oh, sorry, excuse me. I'm just going to mute myself. Sorry about that, I apologise. This is what happens when you work at home. So yes, where was I? We have worked a lot alongside the National Bed Federation, and that is a trade association in the UK which represents manufacturers of beds and their suppliers. And the NBF has taken a really proactive stance, as I said, by engaging their memberships in conversations around the environmental impacts and implications of their products. So over the years, our team at Oak Dean Hollands has supported the NBF towards developing the mattress sector's evidence base, but also through developing an eco-design guide. So therefore, the NBF has really well positioned themselves to be able to approach those politically tricky subjects, such as policies for reusing mattresses, as well as the implementation of extended producer responsibility schemes. And finally, through adopting the value retention process that I've outlined today, the UK furniture sector will really be able to bridge the gap between environmental and economic savings, but also helps them to engage in circular economy and introduce strategies that will reduce our consumption on natural resources and materials, but also minimise the production of waste. Next slide, please. Great, thank you very much for listening. I'm really interested to hear your questions at the end of the presentations, but if you did have any specific questions or want to follow up at a later date, please feel free to email me, and I apologise for the interference of the phone call too. Back to you, Charlie.
Thank you, Olivia. That was great. I really like the importance of value retention in the material value retention processes, especially with regards to the environmental and economic savings. So, that was great to see. And I quite like how you put the relevance of this to circular economy and how it helps us to achieve net zero targets and the social benefits and the supply chain as well. So thank you. That was great. Next up, we have Kate Wright, who is the Group Head of Sustainable Product Development at the DFS Group. She has a wide experience of working in the retail sector, just to mention John Lewis and Dunelm as placeholders, but has worked at some great industry organisations, and I'm really looking forward to Kate's presentation today. So Kate, it's over to you, and thank you very much for partaking in this.
Thanks, Charlie, and thank you very much, Oak Dean and Valpak and BLC for inviting me to chat with you today. So what I want to talk to you about today is working in partnership. Sustainability is a really tricky space, and I want to stress how important it is that we reach out to not only our suppliers and our internal stakeholders, but wider across the industry. Next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of context about DFS Group, I should say. We're actually made up of 3 different brands, if you're not familiar with the group. DFS, which is obviously a very well-established household name, is the leader in the upholstery industry in this country, but it also has some sister brands in the group, Sofology, which is more of a mid-market offering, and also Dwell, which is mainly around furniture with a bit of upholstery. So quite an interesting mix of different brands. It does require a bit of collaboration across the group, I can assure you, so an interesting challenge for me on occasion. But as a group, we have now committed to being net zero or carbon neutral, whichever term you prefer, by 2040. we've actually signed up to the BRC Climate Action Roadmap. Now, for those of you who are familiar with it, it's 3 different targets: Scope 2 carbon emissions by 2030, Scope 1 by 2035, and Scope 3 by 2040. Obviously, Scope 2, we've already committed to renewable energy, so that's absolutely fine. Scope 1 is a bit of a challenge. We have our own delivery fleet called the Sofa Delivery Company, and at the moment, 7.5-ton delivery vehicles. Electric ones particularly are a little hard to come by, not particularly practical. So obviously we don't have the technological solutions to all of those at the moment, but we're hoping they'll be in place by 2035. Our real challenge lies around the net zero by 2040 for Scope 3 emissions. Obviously, Scope 3 emissions encompass everything else. So that's the product all the way through the product life cycle, how it's manufactured, how it's delivered to you. And to give you an indication, we are currently working on what our Scope 3 carbon emissions look like, but we estimate they make up around 98% of our total carbon emissions. So a nice chunky number. We've got 19 years to, well, now 18 years kind of to sort them out. Next slide, please. So the way we're approaching this is we've built a sustainability framework for the business called the Sofa Cycle. I know, what a surprise. We're working towards circularity, but we're using this model to help illustrate each and every single part of a product life cycle, where it touches within the business, and then driving initiatives along each of those different touch points to really look at our environmental impact. And it might not just be around carbon emissions, it could be around just environmental pollution, it could be around education for customers, staff members, it could look at financial accounting attached to carbon pricing, etc. There are lots of different ways that this model is being applied across the business. But primarily today, what I want to talk about is sort of like the beginning and the end of the product life cycle, and a bit about the packaging in between. Next slide, please. So the very beginning of the cycle, we look at transparency and traceability. And the reason I keep coming back to this phrase is this is actually a really new way of working within this industry, where we're asking for our suppliers to really be open and transparent about what our products look like, where are they sourced from, how are they manufactured. And it isn't always necessarily something that is a comfortable conversation, because some of our suppliers don't even understand what their supply chains look like. It's never been a requirement within this industry to ask those kind of questions before. We're a little bit of a laggard industry in the upholstery industry, I have to admit, perhaps maybe more so than apparel or food or even automotive. We've never been challenged on what our supply chain really looks like until now. So we've started our journey on probably two of what we deem to be the high-risk areas, which cause deforestation, so timber and leather. They're obviously two fundamental products, or parts of our products, rather, and we are asking our suppliers to really find out exactly where they're sourcing the materials from and ensure that they are sourced sustainably. This is requiring, obviously, some interesting conversations. Also, in addition to this, UK timber regulations came in, which has also helped in terms of the furniture industry particularly. It does require a certain amount of due diligence, but the leather industry has never had to go through this kind of scrutiny before. And I have to credit BLC and particularly Peter supporting our endeavours on trying to really understand our leather footprint, particularly within Brazil. There's a lot of challenges in that region, and we're really leaning into those. So I guess that's what I really want to drive home here, is that culture shift that's been required, working with our suppliers and enabling some of those conversations and that discovery. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, working on these key areas, the other part that I want to mention was around modern slavery. It's something that hasn't been brought up in this conversation very much, but I actually have to stress that it does impact every single part of the product life cycle. So we're weaving it really closely in around these conversations with modern slavery. I have to stress that actually when you look at the end of the product life cycle, particularly waste transfer stations, it is an area that's actually really been compromised by the use of forced labour. So ensuring that we're including those in our audits at every single touch point has been really important to us as well. Make sure we're getting that really holistic, full view of everything. Next slide, please. So we're actually working with quite a few external partners to support our journey. So we're asking our suppliers to achieve FSC certification and for their leather suppliers to get leather working group certification. We're finding these third-party audit protocols particularly useful, not only in setting quality standards, but they're really, really good for ensuring that customers feel comfortable with the product that they're buying. These are becoming really well-recognized credentials for supply chains and for products. They're also really, really valuable for our suppliers. So they go to a lot of time and trouble to ensure that their supply chains have got the right levels of quality and due diligence, sustainability behind them. So although we can do piles of audits to make sure they're looking good, that's our audit. By having certifications, they can take these credentials back out to their other customers and provide that level of transparency and assurance to other people. We would really love to encourage lots of other manufacturers and retailers to do this, is to rely on these kinds of certifications to provide assurance across the industry. We also then work with other partners such as Carbon Trust on calculating our carbon footprint, and Woodland Trust doing carbon mitigation. Again, these are really valuable tools for our retail teams to then be able to talk about our sustainability initiatives. And even to talk to our customers about them in a way that the customers really understand. I have to admit, most customers don't think about sustainability when they're purchasing upholstery. It's quite far down their mindset, or the consideration set, I should say, which is really a shame, because if they were educated a little bit more, they would understand the importance of what we're trying to do by minimising our impact. But unfortunately, price, style, ease of use is probably more prevalent at this stage. However, there is one particular area where they are extremely passionate. If you just want to step forward. Next slide, please. It's around packaging. Customers are absolutely passionate about the type of packaging that we use. I think they all recognise that the impact that single-use packaging particularly is having on the environment, and a piece of upholstered furniture, when it comes through the door wrapped in various layers of plastic and card, can really upset a customer. So we're trying to find ways to minimise it, and of course ensure that it is recycled. The furniture industry does have some challenges around packaging, particularly anything that's of a delicate nature, whether it be velvets or metal or glass, and polystyrene, which has been used traditionally, which is a fantastic product. It's very cheap, but it's a nightmare for the environment. So trying to find solutions on how we can reduce and remove key components within our packaging and replace it with fully recyclable and environmentally friendly alternatives is an ongoing challenge and a real challenge, particularly for those products that we're shipping from the Far East. So when it gets to the end of the product life cycle, when a customer has finished with it, we have a program we call Sofa Rescue. Now, this is an interesting challenge. The reason so many sofas, I think, end up on landfill, as highlighted by some of my fellow speakers, is it's really difficult to get rid of a sofa. I don't know how many of you have ever tried. And if you call the local council to try and assist, they will take care of it for you, but it will end up on landfill, which is something we want to avoid. We first of all do try and refer people to British Heart Foundation, who will accept sofas, particularly if we make sure that the fire label is still stitched in there. So we're working on that. We're trying to make sure it's really difficult to remove. But we would also like to be able to take the sofa away from them to recycle as much as possible. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with what's involved in trying to do reverse engineering on a sofa or reverse manufacturing. It's really tricky. Sofas are not designed to be reverse manufactured. So that's part of what I'm doing, is working with my suppliers to see what we can do there. But we work with a reverse logistics company called Circularity, who are using a waste transfer network of over 230 different recycle or waste transfer stations, which will recycle our sofas. They extract as much value as they possibly can as single-use materials before looking at whether or not they can reconfigure it in a different way, or unfortunately end up as RDF. We do have a new scheme where we're trialling rental sofas, which are re-engineered, reupholstered, remanufactured after a customer's use. So we're estimating that the average customer life cycle would be around 2 to 3 years. Then all the raw materials are salvaged from that. And the metal frame that we've used is actually then fully reupholstered and set back out again. We're estimating we should have at least 10 different customer uses per frame during its life cycle, which gives it a far longer life cycle than the average sofa. But this is very much a trial. We need to wait and see what customer uptake is like, whether or not they'll be on board with a rental concept. We're also investigating how many sofas we'd be able to reupholster at speed based on traditional methodologies. And we're looking at a few other different options, including a take-back scheme. There are lots of different ways that we're looking to approach this. It is a bit of a logistical nightmare. It is very challenging, both in the product manufacturing and in terms of reverse logistics and even the commercial aspects of it as well. But everything is up for consideration. Next slide, please. So I've whizzed through it, but I guess this is the final point that I want to make, is the number of different partners that we're working with in all these different areas across our business. This is really about collaboration and partnership with every single aspect of our business, our supply chain and industry partners that we can possibly work with. We know we're not going to solve this on our own. There is absolutely no way we will get to net zero and reduce our carbon footprint and achieve true circularity working in isolation. And so we'd love to put the offer out there. If there are other brands or suppliers who'd be interested in working with the DFS group on trying to solve some of these incredible challenges, we would love to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katie, for your presentation. I really quite liked your sofa cycle concept, actually. I think that was quite insightful. But no, I totally agree with you on collaboration, and I think that's key to solving some of the biggest challenges we got. And it's refreshing to see that DFS has such a collaborative viewpoint on that. So yeah, thank you, and thank you for your presentation. We have the next slide, please. Okay, now we have the wonderful panel discussion. So we've got everyone who's presented today on our panel. We also have David Parker, who is our circular economy consultant at Oakdean Hollins. I have got some questions here ready to go, so I'll ask the first one now for you, Katie, if that's okay. What do you believe are the main challenges involved with improving the end-of-life collection and management of furniture at the moment?
Well, the main challenges would be ease of collection from customers. They're obviously a really, really bulky item. It's not one that customers will be able to drop back to store or drop into the post. But it's also in terms of the actual manufacturing structure of the sofa. For example, it's impossible to salvage the wood used in frames because of the number of staples that are used. Once you put a staple into a wooden frame, there's nothing you can do with it because it's not impossible to extract all those staples. So we need to figure out better ways to manufacture the product so the individual raw materials can be separated more easily at the end of product life cycle to salvage those materials. We're also doing a number of different initiatives trying to look at how we could possibly use a compacted version of the waste when it's conglomerated together to find alternative uses to the actual waste we're producing. So I would say it's mainly how do we solve the issues at the end of the product life cycle from a logistics and simplicity point of view.
No, fair enough. And you said in your presentation that your consumers don't really look at the sustainability side of purchasing your goods. But have you ever had any feedback from them or trickle down of any inclination?
We actually do track this across all the different brands quite carefully. From what we've seen, customers, first of all, have actually a really high expectation of what's already being achieved within an industry. They don't necessarily have any understanding of the complexities of what we're trying to do. I think in some ways the pandemic and the supply chain logistics issues that have emerged during the pandemic have actually been really useful in educating people about the complexities of what we're facing in this industry and in all industries, really. But if you ask a customer, do they understand the environmental footprint of foam versus a recycled fibre, they would not have a clue. And to be fair, is it their responsibility to really understand it? I'm not sure that it is. I think it's up to us to figure it out. At the end of the day, I think customers will always choose value and comfort and style over the environmental issue. So the burden is on us to figure this out rather than expect them to understand what we're trying to do.
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you very much. No, that's good points. My next question is for George at Valpac. But based on your experience managing the packaging EPR,
well, that's a very all-encompassing question. I think in multiple areas, really. I certainly think the requirement of businesses to report data and primarily sustainability data to regulators of these new producer responsibility schemes, as well as existing as well, really puts businesses in a position of strength to identify where they can make sustainability gains. For example, if, the DFS group look into where they source their fibres from in terms of geographic locations and the sustainability of those sources, then having that data can identify where changes for good can be made, and that will hopefully in turn benefit them financially in terms of when they report that data to the extended producer responsibility administrators. And I think that's a real core area here. The centrality and the importance of data within these new systems is going to be really crucial going ahead, but also presents really significant opportunities for the businesses affected by it.
Okay, all right, thank you for that, George. My next question is for David Parker at Oak Dean Hollins. Joanna Knight had a question. She wants to know if there's any analysis of the true environmental benefits of remanufacturing, as we touched upon that in our presentation. So I'd just like to present that one to you.
Yeah, we've got plenty in our analysis on remanufacturing. It's coming out of our ears, actually. So across all sectors. So whatever I say now, apply this through the filter of your local sector considerations, but across a vast range of sectors, ranging from aerospace, electronics, white goods, some furniture stuff we've done in the past, automotive, you name it. We've looked at remanufacturing. Remanufacturing, I know in your question there, you had something. Is it just waste reduction? It's not about waste reduction. It's about reducing the inputs to the entire process. So typically in remanufacturing, we're looking at recovering at least 80% of the material and 80% of the energy input. The trouble with recycling and the back end opportunities is that you still have a mountain to climb to get that material back up to input quality, whereas if you're preserving the product as you're doing in remanufacturing, you don't have to put all that work back in. So great news on materials, great news on energy, and I think for me that is the core energy story. If you're looking at net zero, these product value retention strategies are the way to go. They're achieving really high bang per buck on the energy side, and they're upskilling, so addressing some of those social issues that very importantly Katie raised. So improving skills and the value of jobs. Very exciting story, I think, on product value retention. A lot more to go out there.
No, thank you for that, David. Yeah, thank you for that. Next question is for you, Peter, at Eurofins BLC. What do you expect the main barriers to be regarding waste mapping at the moment?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, as with any traceability exercise, I think the sharing of information could potentially be challenging. I think from our experience of mapping supply chains up the supply chain. That's really been the biggest challenge. And we found over time there are certain techniques that you can use to help extract information. But I think also the industry more generally has woken up to the fact that traceability of material supply chains is the way forward, and actually how good business going forward is going to be conducted. And I imagine that in the waste mapping area, we're going to come across similar kind of challenges. So organisations who have not prior to now been asked to reveal what their ongoing solutions are for the waste that they're taking and managing. However, as we've heard from George's presentation and also from Kate's presentation as to the direction of travel from brands, going forward, waste contractors, waste managers are going to have to start sharing more information. And the direction of travel is going to be towards transparency, and that's where we shall try and push with our waste mapping function. And I think, Kate mentioned collaboration in her presentation. I think that's absolutely true. I think as an industry more generally, the more parts of the industry that can push for information and request information, the more likely we are to be able to overcome the challenges of organisations potentially wanting to withhold information. So yeah, I imagine that will probably be the greatest challenge. I think there's also potentially some issues around proving validity of information. There are certain methods already in existence, for example, waste transfer notes and things like that can show the direction of travel of certain waste streams. And so we would look to piggyback off of existing traceability systems such as that to improve the validity of the information that we're producing. But we would imagine these would be probably the stumbling blocks. Although, as I say, we've encountered these in our work around traceability upstream, and feel that there are certainly ways through these. So yeah, that's probably what we feel would be the biggest challenges.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Going back to the EPR, this one's for you, Olivia. I know in your presentation you said that with EPR it's not a one-size-fits-all, but I have a question here from the Q&A panel from Joanna, who says, mentioned that France may have a one-size-fits-all EPR scheme for furniture. I was wondering if you've got any thoughts on that one.
Yeah, no, so that's a very good point from Joanna. It does have a one-size-fits-all approach in relation to covering the entire of furniture products, but it does have separate schemes in place for the domestic and for the commercial, because as you can imagine, they have very different logistical challenges attached to them. So I think that's probably the approach that they've gone down in France. But I think I would just like to emphasize that my thinking behind it is that we need to just better understand that there's a vast array of products on the market. So we need to understand this, have market data behind it. So when we implement any scheme, there's no unintended consequences at all. So for instance, from our DEFRA project, we're looking at products from mattresses to carpets to pillows and duvets, all the way to all the furniture categories. So it was a lot of work, as you can imagine. But at the end, we did try to group those products up to look at what products would be most suitable for what type of policy intervention. So we also shouldn't just assume that EPR is the best policy option, because we could maybe look at adopting product standards or eco-design or voluntary agreements. So there's plenty of options to choose from.
Okay. No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I've got a generalist question now here, so whoever feels they're most suited to pick this one up, please go ahead. Lucas has presented a question. From a product technologist level, is there anything we could do to help a company start with sustainability within the furniture industry?
Can I just jump in there, Charlie? It's a quick starting point. I would say the first two things to do are, as I've said in my presentation, start by defining what sustainability means for your organisation, because it could mean different things within your organisation. And then secondly, I think it's important to look at the materials that you're using. So judge the materials that you have available to you that you potentially might use in your products. Judge their environmental and social impact credentials, both in the upstream manufacture and the downstream long-term end of life of those materials. Your material selection has a significant impact on the environmental and social impacts of your products. And I think also educate yourself on those impacts. All materials have different implications associated with them, and you use the information available to you, use forums such as this to educate yourself on what those material impacts are, and so you can make informed decisions about how you approach making those selections.
And can I just add to that? That's a really good list, but I would also just say engagement is actually a really huge part of this. It's about talking about it across the entire business, talking about your suppliers, making sure that everybody is thinking about it. It is never just going to rest in your hands, although I do love the enthusiasm. It's about reaching out to every single part of the business. And I hate to say, even commercial teams are making really big decisions. Talk to the buyers, because they can make a huge impact on what we end up buying as an industry. If they can help steer from a buying point of view, it will shift things quite quickly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that, Peter and Katie. I also have a question from Jessica. She asks, could the problem of legacy chemicals being designated as POPs, e.g. FR chemicals, scupper a lot of sustainable plans for some time to come as we deal with end-of-life and end-of-user products that were made pre any changes we talked about today?
Yes. It's a real challenge in a nutshell. So yes, you're absolutely right. Going forward, we've got better solutions to the incredibly strict legislation around UK FR treatment. But you're right, there's 60, 70 years worth of products that's currently sitting in homes that have a pretty hideous chemical treatment sitting on them, which means we can't recycle them easily. This is why remanufacturing into a different type of product is probably the best and most circular solution that we can find. But at the moment, too many people are just relying on incineration as a solution, and it's not a good one because it has its own environmental impact with pollution. But yes, it's definitely worth highlighting as an industry-wide problem that we're facing.
I think it's such a good question. That's such a pertinent question, and something that often is overlooked in terms of the chemistry inside materials. One challenge is within a business. So if an organisation has made product and is trying to encourage its customers to recycle its product within its own business, but then you've got other organisations who are trying to recycle it from multiple different sources and then produce a new material from that. And if you have multiple different sources of that recycler, it's very, very challenging to control and understand the chemistry that's gone into that. And as Kate's pointed out, the ongoing development of chemical regulation means that more and more chemistry is becoming considered as hazardous. So it's a real challenge, and something that within the recycled area that often people do overlook or don't consider initially. And it's something that needs a lot more focus, we would say.
Yeah, I would add in there that even in the remanufacturing sphere, it's not a way to avoid the problem, because if it's considered almost to be a new product, you're putting stuff back onto the market under European legislation. It still has to meet the new product specifications and the hazardous content regulations, REACH, and all those sorts of things. So it's not a universal solution, but I'm coming back to this idea of blended approaches to what you're going to do with products at end of life or the point at which they might be reused. I think one of the things you didn't dwell on too much, Peter, was maybe around chemical decomposition, which may come into play. So chemical decomposition technologies are sort of taking materials, particularly very good for organic materials. So, this could fit quite well with the furniture agenda, taking those materials back to raw materials and re-injecting them back into the feedstock streams, hopefully not diverted into fuels. Possibly a temporary solution because it still sort of supports the petrochemical type economy, but I think it's an interim solution before you sort of clear through the backlog of legacy materials.
And if I can come in just finally, certainly in Valpak's experience of operating within the Waste Electricals Producer Responsibility Scheme, In respect to waste electricals, there's been a raft of rules and regulations implemented over previous years around persistent organic pollutants, or POPs as they're known. And we're seeing that an increasing number of materials, if they become waste, or items, if they become waste, they have to be destroyed or irreversibly transformed, as the regulations say. But actually, where this links to furniture is at household waste recycling centres. If we don't have provisions put in place for consumers or brands to inform their consumers that you can take this item back to the store, albeit at the moment at a cost, many will just choose and go and dump it at their local tip. And if it becomes waste in that sense, it then has to be destroyed. Whereas if we're to link this to furniture, similarly, a consumer may think, oh, I don't really want to pay for my item to be collected at this point in time. I will, again, just go and take it to the tip. If they dispose of that and it's got flame retardant materials and chemicals in it, it may need to be disposed of once it becomes waste. So maybe part of this push towards sustainability and extended producer responsibility is ensuring that these common waste disposal avenues have the provisions probably on site, if we're talking about household waste recycling centres, to enable consumers to place unwanted furniture items in a reuse bay, for example, so that these items don't become waste, so they then, by regulation and by law, don't have to be destroyed. Maybe that will be a key avenue to increasing reuse and sustainability.
Great. Yeah, thanks very much for all of you on that question. That's great. I've just got another question just coming from Greg Russell. He asks, will the upcoming proposed changes to the F&F fire safety regulations mean we can recycle or reuse more materials at the end of life? I open that to the floor.
I have to admit, I'm not actually that close to what the new fire regulations are, so I wouldn't want to be able to. Yeah, I wouldn't want to answer that without having the right information. Anybody else?
We at BLC we do testing in this space, fire safety testing. Unlike you, Kate, I'm not close to the regulations. So what we'll do, Greg, is we'll go away. I'll go away and talk to my colleagues after this call, and we'll get a response to that question for you from the technologists who are closer to this issue than I am.
Okay. Oh, great. Thanks for that, Peter. I've just got a general question for all of you to sort of finish up today for this wonderful Wednesday afternoon, and that is, what future aspirations do you have for the UK furniture sector in relation to sustainability?
Well, from my point of view, it is absolutely driving a circular-based system through the industry. It's been really, really smart with the materials that we're using, finding really intelligent ways to recycle products, to remanufacture, and really just closing the loop. As I said at the beginning, I've got a net zero target to meet, so any solutions I can find to help me get there will be marvellous.
I think I would just add on to Kate's point there that to make sure any kind of internal decision making is really backed up by reliable, robust data in order to kind of make sure there's no eco-design dilemmas. So if you put more recycled content into your products, then it's really not durable at all. So really to weigh up all your options and to make sure you're taking a whole life cycle approach.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, because of the level of scrutiny that's now coming onto individual companies, you've got to have something that's defendable. So yeah, it's going to be a really, really important part. I got a question for Kate right at the very end, if we got time at the end.
Yeah, do you want to ask it now? I thought I'd request again.
Oh yeah. I was just quite interested, Kate, because you talked about the transparency, the openness, which is brilliant. I loved your whole story. It's fantastic. It's a really good microcosm, I think, of the way people could go with this and tackle the whole big picture. I was just wondering about engaging with your supply chains. Is the sort of length of the supply chains proving to be a problem for you? And do you foresee tightening of supply chains so you have more control over what's going on, even to the user experience?
No, I wouldn't say the length of the supply chain is a problem. It comes down to the culture of that supply chain. If they're more mature, I think they're used to the kind of scrutiny that we're looking for, their openness. There's a lot more trust and a shared common vision of where we need to get to. And that is definitely prevalent in some industries and in certain countries. It does seem to be those countries that have embraced circularity or sustainability far more, that it's much easier to get the kind of transparency that we're looking for, regardless of how complicated a supply chain might be. It's those nations that haven't perhaps been on the journey as long that we're finding it far more tricky to get that kind of transparency that we're after. So,
interesting. Thank you.
That's great.
Yep.
I may come in just with a closing remark on looking ahead. My hope from certainly if we're looking at producer responsibility policy side of things is that the government is guided by industry on this during that crucial consultation period in a few years' time, I expect. And actually the burdens that are added to industry as a result of these extended producer responsibility measures are practical, and actually the burdens added, the almost necessary burdens that are added, do come at a benefit to key metrics that we'll use to measure the success of these initiatives, and actually that businesses aren't unduly burdened administratively or financially, such that costs increase and significant cost increases are felt by the consumer as well. Lots of factors at play here in order to ensure the system is designed effectively and is future-proof.
Thank you, George.
And my concluding thought, I guess, is I feel that the issues of sustainability and environmental and social impacts on products and considerations that brands are now looking at is no longer, as I say, a fringe activity. And I think that we've got to the point now that we recognise across multiple industries now that action needs to be started to be taken, and a lot of organisations are doing a lot of good work around starting to measure and understand their impacts, and it's fantastic. I think what needs to now happen is an upshift in actual making practical changes. I think there are some industries that are exceptionally good at innovating, and I think that there's a lot of innovative people in our industry, and it's encouraging innovation to actually find practical change is going to be the next stage. And it's going to be really interesting to see how some of the leading organizations and leading brands in this space are starting to innovate, and some of the really exciting developments that are going on to really see positive change in the sustainable space.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, totally agree. Thank you. Well, thank you to the panel there. I think that was great. I think I thank you for turning up today and giving your presentations. They were all wonderful, and I hope that everyone's enjoyed that, especially and thank you again to the participants for coming. I'd also like to say a big thank you to you, Peter, and you, Olivia. I know how hard you've worked on this presentation today, and I should congratulate you both on the hard work you've done and a great webinar. So thank you again. If any of you, the participants, have got any questions, we'd really appreciate your feedback, and we'll hopefully follow up again from this webinar. But all of the main contact information there for Olivia and again Peter from BLC are on the slide there. So if you have any questions at all, please drop them an email and they'll get back to you. But other than that, again, thank you, Peter and Olivia, and I hope you all enjoyed your webinar today. So thank you all for coming and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Charlie. And just to say, there's a couple of questions on that Q&A that Olivia and I will follow up with to ensure that every question does get answered.